Norval Central coming back at you another YouTube video, and I really appreciate all the love and support so far on my social media accounts. Man, it's been a blessing to get back into the YouTube game again. Definitely feel free to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment your thoughts at the end of the video, what you thought. But let's go ahead and get straight into it. So, Florida State's football season has been kind of weird because the off season is kind of coming around, and fans are starting to get a little bit more exciting. We're finally in the month of July, and we're going to have a game August 29th against New Mexico State, and fans are kind of thinking, okay, we're not really a big fan of what Mike Norvell's done so far with the team throughout 6 years at Florida State, coming into his seventh season. But you're hoping that this can kind of be the reality of Florida State and being able to get back to the 22 and 23 season. But the problem is, I just wonder how everything's going to factor into it because you're looking at it like teams like Miami, for example. You never really thought Miami was going to be competitive in this space, and now all of a sudden you can be able to pay as much as you want for prospects, like Texas Tech, for example, another realm of possibility there. It just seems like a lot of teams are kind of getting ahead of the game in terms of being able to pay, and I know a lot of fans are criticizing the efforts of Mike Norvell, and I get it. Florida State has not really had the greatest talent on the roster so far, but it's good enough to win games. You were good enough to beat Alabama last year. You were able to win a couple of games, and then you fall down the stretch and you lose 7 of your last 9. You don't need that to happen in 2026, or you will see Norvell gone, and then you'll kind of have to figure out what you got to do with a lower budget, and also, stadium renovations, football only facility you're still having to pay for, getting out of the ACC. The list goes on and on of concerns. But we're not here to talk about concerns. We're here to talk about the offense of Florida State. Now, I talked about previously that Ashton Daniels was going to be a guy that I thought was going to be very effective. Problem was, you're basing it off basically a two-game sample size at the end of the year against Vanderbilt and Alabama. He had over 500 total yards. He had 8 touchdowns. This is a guy that I think can be very successful in what he can bring to the table. The problem is, you're looking at how everything's going to factor into everything, and I don't really know if Ashton Daniels is going to get all the receivers involved. You got a guy like Deuce Robinson that come back for his senior season, had over 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns last year, 56 grabs, which I think is definitely going to be a number that's going to be increased in 2026. You got a guy like Devin Carter, a true freshman. Then you also have Jason Lopez, another true freshman. Those two true freshmen are important to the success of Florida State in terms of their future foundation for the wide receiver group. You also got a guy like Mekhi Dancy, who is a speedster. I mean, he's an every down kind of player, and he can go on your jet sweeps, but he can also be able to catch out of the backfield. He can be able to be on the slot. He can be on the outside. There's a lot of different weapons that you can have for him. But I definitely think the biggest X factor in all of this is Jayvan Boggs. I get it. There was a lot of hype last year. Deuce Robinson even called him an NFL receiver last year, said he was a dude. And I definitely believe that he can be a factor in what Florida State brings to the table in 2026. I mean, you looked at his offensive game, especially at high school, and I get it, it's high school. But he had 2,000 yards and 21 touchdowns in his last senior season. And then the season before that, he had 93 receptions, 1,400 yards, and 23 touchdowns. So, I mean, that 2 year stretch right there of his junior and senior season is very, very impressive. Can he be able to kind of look that up and being able to do, what's necessary for Florida State? The world may see. Because you look at it from last year, he only had 9 receptions for 103 yards. He only played in 5 games. And the reasoning behind that was because he was always hurt. There was always issues that he had. Even that NC State game that he had at the end of the year, he didn't even, hardly play in the Florida game because he got hurt again. It just comes to a point where, you have the 4 receptions, you have 56 yards, you didn't have any touchdowns, but you saw progress in that. Now, obviously, I'm not going to beat down your door and say, oh, 4 receptions for 56 yards and no touchdowns is great. I'm not saying that at all. He only had 1 touchdown all of last year, and that was against East Texas A&M in that basically an easier contest where you routed them completely, a 77-3 matchup there. But I just wonder what Florida State's going to be able to do because Florida State, as you know, is going to have Mike Norvell as their play caller. He's going to have those short passing concepts. He's going to have slants. He's going to have tunnel screens. He's going to have different things like that to get your offensive playmakers the ball in their hands. And I think this could really factor into what Jayvan Boggs does. Now, he's not going to be your fastest guy on the roster. I think he's more of a secure pass catcher type of guy that you can be able to have in that short span of getting the football in his hands to see what happens. I'm not going to say he's Mekhi Dancy fast. Nobody really is in college football, and that's why I'm kind of concerned that NCAA 14 or 27 has him as a 95 speed. It definitely shouldn't be able to be there. But I do think that Jayvan Boggs can really be a factor in what Florida State does this upcoming season. Not to say that he's going to be some 50 catch guy with 800 yards and 7 touchdowns. I'm not even suggesting that. But I'm saying, can you be able to maybe even double or triple your production and being able to be a guy that they can possibly count on as a year 3 type of guy that can take that next step forward so that way it doesn't take all the pressure on 2 younger freshmen in Devin Carter and Jason Lopez and even a Makai Danzy that's kind of going into his own. I mean, look at the factor that's going into it. You got a Makai Danzy that was at a running back position, switched over to the wide receiver position, and now he's playing a whole new position. He's still learning how to catch the football too. So I just wonder what's going to happen there. I know Devin Carter is way ahead of his years at this point. I know they've raved about him, and we get it. True freshmen, they always kind of live in that realm, and I understand they can look really good without pads on. But once the pads come on, we'll see what happens. He's a true freshman. He's going to have mistakes. But I just wonder what's going to factor into that because you looked at Vandrevius Jacobs, for example, and Hakeem Williams. Those were 2 guys that Jacobs was looking really good at one point. Now, ironically enough, he's at Miami. And then you had Hakeem Williams, who was at Colorado. You look at both of those guys, you thought Williams was going to be the better guy in that regard because of his star ranking out of high school. Never really panned out much at Florida State, ended up transferring. And Jacobs didn't really either, but they were raving about Jacobs early in the year. And then it turns out neither really had quite the production that you really wanted them to have. So true freshmen can kind of be in and out. You don't really know what you're going to get sometimes from those true freshman receivers. You're not going to have everything go your way with some of the younger receivers. But I do think that Jayvan Boggs could be a really good guy that Florida State can rely on, specifically in the 27 season. But I think he could definitely surprise you in 26. Don't forget about Tayshawn Gelsey is another guy who I think can be there. Tariq Mallory is another guy who I think they really like also at the wide receiver spot. EJ White's another guy they really like in this true freshman class. I think those are a couple of your guys that can be a little bit more sleeper types. But, all the rave and the glory goes to, Devin Carter and Jason Lopez right now. But I definitely think Boggs can really be that factor that goes into it, but he's got to stay healthy. He's got to stay motivated too. This is a big factor and a big year for Boggs to be able to do that, because if not, you could be kind of looking at him as a guy that kind of take a step back and maybe Carter and Lopez takes his spot up in the rotation. And then what are you going to do as Boggs? Are you going to be able to step up as a junior? Or are you going to be able to kind of fall behind some underclassmen? So I definitely think that's going to be a factor in what Florida State does this season. Not to say he's going to be the most flashiest guy there. He's not going to put up your Deuce Robinson numbers, but I definitely think he can be a factor in what Florida State wants to do offensively. Being able to put the points on the scoreboard, being able to score in the red zone, I think could be a big factor in what Florida State does in 2026. But I hope each and every one of you enjoyed the video. Be sure to share your comments on what you think Boggs will do this season. I know he was very productive in high school. High school is a little bit different than college, but I definitely think that Boggs can be that type of guy. Do you think the same in that? But just let me know your comments down below. And as always, go Noles.